Hello and welcome to another brand new episode of India's World. I'm Teena Jha. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar has reiterated India's commitment to further build the momentum of regional cooperation under the framework of BIMSTEC, which is the Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation. Speaking at the 17th BIMSTEC ministerial meeting on Thursday, the External Affairs Minister said that BIMSTEC enjoys the unique strength of connecting South and Southeast Asia. He expressed satisfaction that the region is witnessing rapid economic growth with growing political and economic cooperation among member states, adding that BIMSTEC has achieved significant progress in many of the priority areas of cooperation. But at the same time, as Jaishankar stressed upon the need for BIMSTEC countries to make a paradigm shift in raising the level of cooperation and regional integration to make it an even more stronger, vibrant and result-oriented grouping. BIMSTEC has a combined GDP of $2.7 trillion and is home to 1.5 billion people, roughly accounting for 22% of the global population. On this edition of India's World, we will analyze how BIMSTEC has evolved through its journey since 1997, its growing significance in India's foreign policy, and going forward, what would be required to further build the momentum of regional cooperation between the members of the grouping, which marks its silver jubilee next year. So to discuss these aspects and much more, I'm joined on the program today by two eminent panelists. Let me first introduce them to you. I have with me on the show today former Ambassador Prabhu Dayal and Mr. Shakti Sinha, his Director, Atal Bihari Vajpayee Institute of International Studies, Vadodara. Thank you to both my distinguished guests for joining me on the program today. Ambassadors, let me begin the program today with you. BIMSTEC, as I said in my opening remark as well, will mark its silver jubilee next year. So if we are to look back at its nearly 25-year-old journey, how do you see the grouping having evolved over the years, especially in the context of the significance that it has gained in India's foreign policy?
Well, Teena, first of all, thank you for having me on your show. And thanks also for the very nice summary which you have given in terms of your opening remarks. Now, let me mention that in 1999, the renowned columnist Thomas Friedman had written that the world had gone from a system built around walls to a system built around networks. India has always been favoring good networking with its neighbors, and that's why India had taken a pioneering role in setting up SAARC. Unfortunately, the political relationship with Pakistan has been rather up and down, and the Pakistanis have come in the way for meaningful regional cooperation. Then a significant step was taken when in 1997, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, Thailand formed BIST-EC, which then was later transformed into BIMSTEC with the addition of Myanmar. And then later again in 2004, Nepal and Bhutan joined, and this became the Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation. Now, as you mentioned, the External Affairs Minister in his remarks at the BIMSTEC Foreign Ministers meeting underlined the importance of connectivity, because there's no doubt that networking entails good connectivity. And he said that there was a need to put in place legal frameworks for smooth connectivity by finalizing the BIMSTEC Coastal Shipping Agreement and the Motor Vehicles Agreement at an early date. I understand that the BIMSTEC Summit is also going to be held soon. So these nations are working very closely towards enhancing cooperation within the region. There are some problems. Let me underline. The situation in Myanmar, unfortunately, is presenting some challenges. Then there is the looming presence of China, which always impedes meaningful regional cooperation where India is concerned, and it has close relations with many of the countries in BIMSTEC. So there are problems which confront BIMSTEC, but I feel that the countries involved, particularly India and Thailand, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Bhutan, Nepal, all of them have in mind the need to enhance the framework of connectivity, enhance cooperation. So hopefully the problems and challenges which the organization is confronting will be sorted out, and the vision that we all have for cooperation within this region will be realized.
Absolutely. So what are these roadblocks is something that I'll come back to you and discuss in the course of the program. Mr. Sinha, coming to you for your comment. So as the ambassador pointed out, and which was underlined by the External Affairs Minister as well at the BIMSTEC ministerial meeting, that robust connectivity is an essential prerequisite of economic integration in the region, and a master plan for transport connectivity has been endorsed for adoption at the next summit. Now, how is this going to boost connectivity and integration of the entire region?
Actually, I think connectivity is at the heart of the success of any such network. India, Bangladesh signed the coastal shipping agreement a few years ago. And based on that, in 2017, BIMSTEC itself started moving towards having this coastal shipping agreement. Because for coastal shipping, you're within 20 nautical miles of the coast. You don't need big vessels, they're much cheaper. You don't need deep drafts, so ports requirements are simpler. And therefore, if along the coast, after all, this is the Bay of Bengal, a dynamic economic region, populous region, lots of resources, if we're able to move goods through the water route and the land route, and therefore the comprehensive master plan that you just mentioned will hopefully be adopted this year. And as a component of that, as I said, the coastal shipping agreement is so very important. Once that comes through, then India, Bangladesh, Myanmar directly, and using the waterways of India and the railways of India, Nepal and Bhutan, connecting either to Indian ports or to ports like Chittagong via the rail route and the natural waterways number 2, I think the amount of dense network of then routes, rail, road routes, in fact, Bangladesh and Bhutan are even talking about running planes for cargo between the two countries over shortcut and rail links. So now suddenly people are seeing it very differently. Who would have thought that Bangladesh and Bhutan would be discussing building rail networks across India with them? So, there's immense potentialities exist. We've been talking about the Asian Highway, very important road, no doubt. But it's not just one highway. It is to emphasize connectivity at all levels, and for which I think this master plan is an excellent idea. And specifically, if we come to an agreement on coastal shipping and on motor vehicles, something which SAARC had almost agreed in Kathmandu, which BBIN took it up, but then Bangladesh, Bhutan developed some reservations about it. I think we have to get these two agreements together to make life so much easier, to reduce the transaction cost of trade. Because transaction costs are the major part in obstacles to trade. Remove those obstacles to trade, and suddenly the movement of goods becomes simpler, faster, and cheaper.
Yes, absolutely. So connectivity, Ambassador, is of course going to be very, very crucial if you talk about regional cooperation, enhancing it further, and regional integration as well. If we talk about the sectoral cooperation among BIMSTEC, currently it is involved in about 15 sectors. Way back in 1997, it started with just 6 sectors. But another very important thing that the External Affairs Minister said, that it is high time that the group dwells upon how to make a paradigm shift in raising this level of our cooperation and regional integration. So beyond connectivity, what are the other focus areas that the other member states must, it should be on the thrust area that they should work upon so as to further enhance this cooperation?
Well, to answer your question, first of all, I would like to place before you what are the interests of India and what are the core policies in regard to BIMSTEC. Firstly, we have a neighborhood first policy, and BIMSTEC helps us to give primacy to our immediate neighborhood. Secondly, we are pursuing an Act East policy, and this would enable India to connect with Southeast Asia. And then, of course, there is this question of the economic development of India's northwestern states. They would be linked better through the Bay of Bengal region via Bangladesh and Myanmar. Now, it is very, very important that the countries of the region should be able to forge out certain agreements which will enhance cooperation. For instance, the BIMSTEC region does not have a free trade agreement. The countries have been working on it, but as yet there is no agreement that has been finalized, and I think this is a problem area. There are, as you said, many focus areas. These include, of course, trade and investment, technology, energy, transportation and communications, tourism, fisheries, agriculture, cultural cooperation, environment and disaster management, public health, people-to-people contacts, poverty alleviation, and counter-terrorism, climate change. There is a whole gamut of issues which are before BIMSTEC. However, the pace of cooperation has been impeded by bilateral problems. Let me mention one very significant one, the problem between Myanmar and Bangladesh over the Rohingyas. So when there are bilateral problems of this nature, the progress in regard to cooperation gets impeded. So while all the countries do have a very serious intention of furthering cooperation and working on all these sectors that I mentioned, the pace of progress in regard to finalizing agreements is comparatively slow. And I think the summit that is going to take place soon in Sri Lanka will try and speed up the progress. That is my view in this regard.
Okay, Mr. Sinha, so perhaps these very factors which are impeding growth, in the wake of which the External Affairs Minister said that there is now need to make the organization more focused and more result-oriented. So what should be the approach going forward be for BIMSTEC to take care of these bilateral factors not actually impacting the overall growth, the overall cooperation of the region?
You know, BIMSTEC doesn't even have its internal rules of business, standard operating procedures, as an example. Fortunately, these have now been negotiated with. And again, hopefully, by the time the summit takes place in Colombo later this year, hopefully, these will be adopted. Then the rules of the game are clear. You don't discuss bilateral issues, obviously. You don't comment on other countries. But there are always friction points. How do we handle that? So you cannot be a body which exists outside in a vacuum. You are alive to the world around it. So you have to develop this internal understanding within each other. 2, we have 14, 15 focus areas. That's simply too much at this stage. Ambassador Dayal right to point out, we could not even agree on FTA with a fundamental disagreement between India and Thailand on certain issues, which are not likely to go away soon. So let us pick the areas where we can develop much faster. Tourism is there. The tourism fund also is there. You mentioned connectivity is there. I'm expanding it to electricity, the grid. That paper has also been circulated and is generally accepted, but you have to actually come to an agreement on it and what are the rules of going about it. That is so very important for all of us. Because all our countries, by and large, Thailand apart, have surpluses at certain times and deficits at other times of electricity. If you are jointly together in a larger grid, your surplus time may be the deficit time of somebody else. So once your countries start gaining through going through BIMSTEC, the organization or the network becomes much more focused. Third is people's contact. And I'm glad that the minister did mention that later this year in November, the Government of India, Ministry of Tourism, supported by the Ministry of External Affairs, that is ICCR, and an organization that I'm associated with, it's not a government organization, supported by the government, International Buddhist Confederation, will be hosting a very large Buddhist conference at the end of November this year. We would be calling in again scholars and monks from these countries. So, developing relationship with each other across the spectrum of issues, very solid issues like transport and electricity, but also issues of culture and soft power, so-called, like Buddhism, like otherwise a cultural heritage. I mean, there's so much more that has to be done, but we'll have to devote capital to it. By capital, I don't just mean money, I mean effort, I mean manpower, the ability of our countries to engage with each other, select what can be done. Counterterrorism, terrorism financing, cyber security, yes. NSS have met 3 times, if I remember correctly, all of our countries. This is again an area where you have to again. So, what are the core areas of concern to each other if you come to an understanding of it and then look at it, whether it's climate change, whether it's agriculture, but don't pick up everything. If you pick up everything, the chances are that you'll dissipate your energy and really achieve very little. I would rather focus really on 3-4 big things, moving on it, and then as you develop the capacities and the appetite, widening your agenda.
Absolutely. So it's not just physical connectivity, but also people-to-people connect as well, and cultural exchanges that are also very, very important if we are to take forward the regional cooperation. Ambassador Dayal, coming back to you on the challenges bit, there are, of course, some traditional and non-traditional security challenges that have been pointed out by the External Affairs Minister and which remain for taking forward this regional cooperation. So how to tackle this very potential roadblock when we talk about integration and growth in cooperation in the region?
Well, there is a trust deficit between some of the member countries of BIMSTEC. And when there is a trust deficit, mutual cooperation does get impeded. Now, Mr. Sinha mentioned very correctly that there are perhaps too many issues which BIMSTEC is trying to deal with, and that there is a need perhaps to focus attention on some priority areas. Now, one of the major challenges which is confronting the world at the moment relates to COVID. And India has shown how much it can assist other countries in terms of giving vaccines and helping them to cope with this problem. Now, one of the areas of cooperation included in BIMSTEC is public health. Now, public health should be a priority area identified by BIMSTEC countries because they have realized that this is a major challenge, as major and as serious as any sort of security challenge. So there is a lot of work that can be done. India has played a pioneering role. India has been very generous. Vaccine Maitri has shown that we can help others, and perhaps there are so many other areas like that where we can give a helping hand to our fellow members in BIMSTEC. The point again is that the trust deficit does need to be narrowed. Connectivity will only improve when nations which are members of BIMSTEC don't distrust each other. Unfortunately, that situation has not yet been realized. Nonetheless, there are still some areas where we can work together. And I said public health remains one major area of concern, and there is no reason why the countries of BIMSTEC should not be able to focus energies and identify methods of cooperation so that major challenges in this area can be overcome.
Absolutely. Mr. Sinha, so even though BIMSTEC has emerged as a preferred grouping for regional cooperation in recent years, there are quite a few challenges that Ambassador Dayal has pointed out. So what is the way ahead then so that we're able to realize the full potential of BIMSTEC cooperation?
In continuation of what we've been discussing, see, public health has very rightly, when the analysis emerged. Yes. I mean, take up the issues that are of concern to each other, development concern, things like that, but not a contentious issue with a neighbor. So if you take the contentious issue first, you will never develop the trust required. So therefore, take up the issues on which we can cooperate with each other, where we share a larger vision, work together, understand each other, and the more you work with each other and adjust and accommodate each other's concerns, the level of trust and faith in each other and in BIMSTEC as a network grows. Once that grows, you can move to a situation where you can very gently, behind the scenes, handle even contentious issues. But that's a long haul. First, we must deliver on specific things. Transport is something we should deliver on very quickly. That should not be delayed, land and sea, and where possible air. Now the things are hopefully may clear up soon once the vaccination drive picks up steam. Electricity, again, you can pick up fairly soon. And very, very specific issues of technology, cyber security, etc., which many of these countries are relatively weak in terms of their internal capacities, while some others in the grouping have much better capacities. So cyber is something is really moving fast. On trade, FTA may be delayed, but if you improve the border processes, and with now even Nepal adopting electronic documentation of exports and imports, once all of us have adopted that, India has adopted it, then again you're able to reduce the friction at ports and border points, and you can increase trade, emphasize on border trade so that local communities get a sense of ownership, huge advantage to it. So there are lots of opportunities that you have to pick it up. Don't just look at very, very big things at the same time. Look at some smaller things also, but we can deliver the completion of the Sitwe Port Kaladan project, trilateral, 3 countries to benefit, the Bangladesh, Bhutan, India waterways network. So, these are the kind of things you should develop so that each of the country feels, yes, there is something in it for me, I benefit, and therefore I can also contribute. You see, once you're benefiting, you're willing to contribute. So willing to pay up and not get anything out of it, countries lose interest. And yes, India as the largest country in the grouping, if the combined population is 1.8 billion, 1.2 plus is in India alone. If our GDP is 2.8 plus, India is again the largest single trillion. India is again the largest, overwhelming the largest single contributor. Others are barely between them 300 billion. So we have to really put our weight into it, put our muscle into it, not the hard muscle, the softer muscle, put our capital, our human beings, and connect all of government approach to really move on it.
Okay, Ambassador Dayal, so how can India put its weight into enhancing cooperation, as Mr. Sinha is suggesting?
Well, of course, India has shown that it is prepared to go the whole hog in regard to cooperation with other countries. I mean, I again stress that Vaccine Maitri has shown that India has been so generous in assisting other countries. In fact, there has been some criticism in our own country that we should first vaccinate our own people before helping others. But India has been very steadfast in regard to extending the hand of friendship to other countries. We have not been selfish at all. We have helped others even at the cost of being able to help some sections of our own society. So the fact is that when it comes to the crunch, India goes the whole hog in assisting its friends. And the member countries of BIMSTEC should realize that meaningful cooperation is what India will give them. Of course, we have to be very wary because China, as I said earlier, is lurking in the background. And China utilizes all our neighbors for its own interests. For instance, if we have a free trade agreement, we have to be careful that there should be a trigger mechanism so that if exports from any particular country exceed a certain amount, then we have to be very wary because maybe Chinese goods are being imported in that country and marked as being manufactured there and are being exported to India. So the forum should not be utilized to hurt India. This is something that I think we will be underlining. And once the basic guarantees are available, I think there can be no impediments to regional cooperation in all areas which have been identified by BIMSTEC. But as Mr. Sinha and I both mentioned, we should focus on some key areas which are less contentious, iron them out, have some agreements on them, and then move to others which are perhaps comparatively more contentious. So the way forward, I think, is to go step by step by step.
Absolutely. Mr. Sinha, so coming back to you for one last comment from you. How will India ensure that this forum is not used to hurt India, and how big a threat is China, as Ambassador Dayal is pointing out?
I'm glad you asked the question because, in fact, that is the idea forming in my head. You know, we have just on BIMSTEC moved fairly ahead on finalizing the rules of origin, as it is called, in trade. So you finalize rules of origin to ensure precisely that if I'm importing a thing duty-free from, say, X country, that product is substantially, not completely, because in this day of integration, you can't have completely, substantially produced in that country. And it's not just a matter of changing the label, you know, made in that host country instead of made in China. We are moving on that direction. So I think we have realized that, I mean, China is the big 800-pound whatever in the room. You can't ignore China, but you have to ensure that your interests are protected and that in the process of developing good neighborly relations with all our countries, from Thailand to Nepal, by all the others, that in all such cases, the actual production manufacturing is done in that country itself. Some countries like Thailand, the SME sector is very vibrant, but is also very well networked into the larger Chinese export models. And therefore, this is the reason why things like rules of origin have been made clear from the very start. Any ambiguity about it, the host country tomorrow will feel upset that India is being prickly while all India is doing to protect itself. So it is better that you build into it right in the beginning itself, unambiguously, that this is mentally meant to help manufacturers that are substantially made in that country. So I think this kind of steps, as an example only, we have to be very careful. Second is by increasing cultural exchanges. I mean, a lot of the Burma, Myanmar, and Thailand and Bhutan are very substantially Buddhist countries. Most of the pilgrimage sites are in India. Buddha spent his entire life going up and down the Gangetic plains. help facilitate the movement. Already large numbers comes, possibly greater could come once things are okay after COVID. How to facilitate movement of these pilgrims and tourists to sites in India? How do people from those countries come to India to study? So not just the pilgrim, the students to study. So there are many things you can do which are not China focused, but in a different way. You develop a relationship with each other that is outside the shadow of China. So I would look at it that way rather than exclusively focusing on China, but to use it to develop better relationship across the spectrum with each other.
Certainly. So with that, I'll have to call it a wrap of this edition of India's World. So as both our panelists have suggested, BIMSTEC has indeed over the years emerged as a promising sub-regional grouping with growing strategic and economic interests, not just of the member states, but also of the international community in the Bay of Bengal region. But there are several factors which are impeding growth, and there is now need to make the organization more focused and more result-oriented. So with that, it's a wrap on this edition of India's World. Thank you once again to both my guests for joining us on the program and sharing their perspective with us and our viewers. Pleasure having you on the show. So that's it from us on this edition of India's World. Just in case you missed the television broadcast, let me remind my viewers, you can also watch it on YouTube and Twitter, and you can also get back to us with your feedback and suggestions. Thank you for your time.